I'm Lola Blanc.
And I'm Megan Elizabeth.
And we're the hosts of Trust Me, the podcast about cults, extreme belief, and the abuse of power.
Now on podcast 1.
We're real-life cult survivors.
And we're here to tell you anyone can join a cult.
If you've ever dived headfirst into a new self-help program,
or believed wholeheartedly in a spiritual practice,
or even just trusted someone with your life,
guess what? You're just as susceptible as everyone else.
No one is safe, especially not Megan.
I'm the most susceptible.
We want to debunk the myth that people who join cults are uneducated or naive or broken, because anyone can be manipulated by a narcissist or feel good in a new group they've joined.
And we should know we both have been.
Join us every week as we explore the world of extreme belief,
talk to survivors and experts,
and share our own experiences with cults and the abuse of power.
Don't be fooled. You might be next.
Get new episodes of Trust Me every Wednesday on Podcast One, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere you get your podcasts.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we continue our look at the timeline in the Hae Min Lee case. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my persuasive co-host, Alice.
Well, hello, Brett. Am I persuasive because I've persuaded you to record into like the midnight hours a double episode of Adnan? Of course, you guys are hearing this the next day, but yesterday and today's episodes we recorded in a marathon episode as my baby's crying in the other room, and I am leaving her so that we can begin our Adnan series.
Yeah, Alice loves her favorite child is a podcast always, so that's what she does, and I appreciate that. I'm glad, Alice, that your priorities are in order.
Your words, not mine. But really, we dedicate this episode to Mr. Alice, who is currently holding baby Brittany so that we can record this episode. So thank you, Mr. Alice.
Yes. And so we have Alec Murdaugh took us 10 episodes. John Benet Ramsey took us 10. Kind of took us 9, but we did a follow-up, so it's basically 10. This outline is twice as long as any outline we've ever done, but we're not going to take 20 weeks to do this. That is our commitment. So that's the reason we're doing the second episode this week on this. There may be a couple more weeks we end up doing 2 episodes. If you, in years in the future, if you're coming to this and you look at this and you're like, oh my goodness, they got 20 episodes on Adnan. Well, congratulations. You get to listen to this for a long time. Personally, when I really enjoy a case on a podcast, I'm always sad when it ends. And I'm always like, man, I wish they would do more. You never have to worry about that with us. We always do way too much, so.
Way too much is like the story of my life. Alice, yeah, I know her. She's way too much.
That's why we love you, Alice. That's why we love you. Okay.
Oh, gosh. Back to the timeline.
Back to the timeline, because there's just no time for chit-chat when it comes to this case. And look, I don't know how long this episode is going to go. It's going to go as long as it needs to go. If it's a little shorter than normal, so be it. If it's a little longer than normal, so be it. It's the second episode this week. So, bonus time. It's kind of like, whenever at a football game and it goes in overtime and the announcer says, free football. And you kind of want to kill him because you don't want to go to overtime because you really just wish you had won in regular time, but whatever. So that's where we're at. We're in free time. Everything you get is bonus time. So we talked about last time how we're at a point in Adnan and Hae's relationship where Hae has decided she's losing herself in this relationship and she wants to cut it off. She wants to end it. And so we get these diary entries at the end of August that are basically her saying, look, I'm tired of lying to myself, lying to my friends, lying to my parents. You got to remember one thing we're going to talk about more. Hae and Adnan are in sort of a forbidden relationship. There's a little bit of a Romeo Juliet thing going on here. Adnan, his parents, they're devout Muslims, they're from Pakistan. They don't really believe in dating, and they certainly don't believe in dating people outside of the religion. So this is a relationship that would be forbidden. Hae's family is also conservative, not as conservative as Adnan's, and sometimes it's presented as they sort of had an equal partnership in this, and her parents were just as strict as his. That's not really true, but still, she's hiding the extent of this relationship to her family. Probably her brother is the only person who really knows how close they are. But in any event, she's decided, I'm done with this. I need a break. August 27th, she's breaking things off. But that doesn't last long. Let's fast forward to September 2nd, 1998. So all of what? 5 days later. Here's what she says. I love my life. Nothing can get better than this. Let's see, she says after a smiley face. I have my baby who loves me very much. And obviously her baby is Adnan. I've got my license. And people are talking about getting me a car. And she will eventually get a car, which is going to become very important in this case. I'm so excited about starting to search for a job. And, you know, I can't read her cursive handwriting, even though it's very pretty. But I'm starting to search for a job. The job also is going to become very important. I mean, in some ways, this entry is when you know what's going to happen. Dramatic irony is when you know what's going to happen and you see this and you're just like, man, her job is going to become very important as well. Nothing can go wrong and nothing will. Ugh. I love driving, my baby, school, my baby, lacrosse, my baby. You get the idea. I'm tired. Night.
I mean, here you see kind of the swinging of emotions at this age. But again, what's relevant is how she's viewing the relationship. And it's relevant, I also think, that she can go from, utterly in love with him to I'm tired of these lies. And they could both be true. I think we all see this in our lives. When you're in the thick of any emotion, everything falls away. And so whatever happened in those 5 days, now she's back to being utterly in love with him. And it can also still be consistent with what she's written before. But again, we're looking at what she feels at these times. And it is so interesting that she even writes out numbers for each of these facts. It's like she's laying out the case outline for her ultimate murder investigation. It's really interesting. And of course, famous last words, nothing can go wrong and nothing will. And that's exactly what you think when you are a high schooler. So whatever happens, I mean, she never ever thought that she was going to end up dead, end up murdered, probably by someone she knows very well. And the people around her probably felt that way too. Adnan probably felt this way too. We don't have Adnan's diary, but same with him. He's getting college admission letters from counselors. He's looking to the future. I mean, they both have everything ahead of them.
Yeah, and you cannot read this and listen to this and not be transported back to high school. We were all there. We all lived this. We all were her in some way or another. And I don't know, this case is, people take it so seriously and they take it so personally, and it's hard not to, because these people's lives are just laid out in front of us in such a visceral way, more than most cases. Most cases we talk a little bit about the victim. Maybe we know a little bit about them. We throw out the cliches about how they light up the room, but we don't know that much. But with her, you're seeing sort of her laying out this relationship, this entire relationship, that if you believe the state, results in her death. And you see all of these things written and you know what's coming, and it's just so tragic. It's hard to overstate how tragic it is. But as far as Hae is concerned, they had a little rough patch. They've come through it. Now they're moving forward. September 21st, Adnan starts his job as an EMT. This will be mentioned during trial testimony, and in fact, the prosecution will, during cross-examination, actually try and use this to their advantage to say that Adnan would have known, because he was an EMT, when someone is dead, and for the purpose of strangling them to death. I don't know, it seems like a stretch to me. It's one of those things you throw out in cross-examination that might have seemed like a good idea at the time, but when you read it back in a cold transcript, you're kind of like, that's weird. But anyway, he has this job, Adnan's actually 17. This is kind of a humorous thing, to the extent anything's humorous in this case. It is illegal for him to have this job because he's supposed to be 18. And if you read the police report in this case, which is like 2,700 pages long, and I read the whole thing for you. If you read it, there's actually this
and distilled it to only 80 pages.
There's this whole back and forth where the guy who hired Adnan is begging his bosses not to fire him because he hired a guy who was only 17, which you totally can't do. And you can imagine the liability if Adnan goes out on a call and the person dies, and it's like, you had a 17-year-old working on my grandfather or whatever. And so it's sort of an interesting back and forth. And Adnan actually eventually gets fired from being an EMT, not because he's accused of murder, but because when he's accused of murder, everybody realizes he's not 18. And so he ends up getting terminated. So it's one of those like funny little things that happen.
Side shows.
Yeah, exactly. Which that's kind of what I love about doing this podcast. It's just one of the little things I love about it, when these little sort of side rabbit holes happen in the middle of a case. And it's interesting to me. It's probably not interesting to you. I'm sorry I brought it up. But in any event, September 21st, he starts his job as an EMT. Adnan's working. He's going to school. He's dating Hae. September 30th, Hae writes that Adnan is thinking about moving out of his house because he's not getting along with his mother. But he doesn't want to because his father is sick. And this is something that I feel like is not discussed a lot in this case, which is what's going on in Adnan's home life. And I bring this up for two reasons. Number one, because one of the things that people will say is that Adnan is in this forbidden relationship with Hae. And the reason that he eventually murders her is because she breaks up with him, and it's shattering to him, and he realizes he made all these sacrifices for her, and how could she do this to them? And in a rage, he kills her. And that, brings in his religion and his family dynamic and all this other stuff. Other people will say, no. Adnan didn't take religion that seriously. He actually was on the outs with his family and was thinking about, maybe even moving out. But they don't really get into what must have been incredible stress for him. And I think that's important. A lot of times when people commit crimes, underlying stress, which may not even be related to the crime itself, can be very important. We don't know a lot about this. Adnan doesn't talk a lot about it. All we know is what we see in Hae's diary. But clearly, there was a stressful situation for him in the home, to the extent that he is talking about leaving home. And the only reason he's not is because of these health problems with his father. And you have to sort of imagine that he's thinking about striking out and doing his own thing, but he sort of keeps getting pulled back into this family because of his father who's ill. I don't know exactly what to make of this. I don't know how significant it is, but I do think it's something that gets missed. All these conversations about this case, podcasts and documentaries and everything else, nobody really talks about what was going on with Adnan beyond sort of the obvious, the sort of relationship and how it relates to his religion. But clearly, he's having some other stuff that's going on with his life as well.
Yeah, I think that's fair to point out. I think most 17, 18-year-olds are probably feeling this anyway. You're about to fly the coop. You're beginning to feel probably more grown up than you actually are. Naturally, around that time, people have tensions with their parents. They want to move out. They want to graduate high school and move out and go to college if that's what they're doing. And so that kind of is not unique to Adnan, but then kind of add on the religion part of it. We've heard of what, good mosque attending boy he was, and how he volunteered at his mosque, and religion was central to his family life, but then he kind of also had this mainstream American life in high school that was completely kind of opposed to what his family thought he lived like. And again, I think many people probably lived those kinds of lives as 17-year-olds, but it's heightened when you have either immigrant parents, I know that from experience, where you have a very different home life or a very different church life or mosque life than you do what you face at school, where it seems like everyone, especially your friends who may just live a mainstream life, who have, born in America, grow up in America, they get to listen to pop music and, things like that I wasn't allowed to do. My parents thought pop music was like led to drugs, sex, and, rock and roll and all that stuff. And that's a very real tension. And so I say this because I don't think it's completely unique to Adnan. I think there are swaths of people that go through what he's going through, but also doesn't take away from the fact that it's very real for him. And you can tell from the way that Hae writes that emotions run high in general, probably for both of them. Of course, this is all through her words, but she is in a relationship with Adnan, and they probably talk in similar emotional tones as well. That's typically what happens in relationships, is like one person is not way up here and another person is down here. They're probably matched somewhat in their emotional tones and how they talk about the experiences in their lives. And so I think that's a great point to bring up here, and something that all of us can probably relate to some degree, what Adnan's facing. About to grow up, not yet a man, not a boy sort of feeling, especially when he's in a relationship, which is a very adult thing. Having a job, it's a very adult thing, yet he's still only 17.
Yeah, and I want to talk about this some more, but I do want to read what she wrote, because don't take my word for it. She writes, well, for a few days up to last Friday, he, being Adnan, was going to move out of his house. And for the longest time, I felt guilty as hell for being a part of that, or a part of what severed the tie between him and his mother. But he didn't move out of his house, as I just found out, because his father is pretty sick. So Hae's dealing with a lot here too. She recognizes that part of the issue that Adnan's having is her, because she is a cause of problems between Adnan and his family, and Adnan is struggling with this, about what to do about this. We're going to talk some about Adnan and his religion and Islam and all that other stuff. It's a toxic topic, because so many people try and use it to their advantage in this case. Either you mention it at all and you're Islamophobic, and the only reason he was convicted is because he's Islamic and all this other stuff. And then other people are like, no, it's a toxic religion led him to hate women or whatever. And the reality, like most things, is very much in the middle. Like most people, religion plays a big role in Adnan's life. And one of the weird things in this case, I think, as someone who grew up in a very religious household, and is very religious myself, but did not always live up to the tenets of my faith, there is this notion out there that Adnan is either like super religious and a very good sort of Muslim boy, or he isn't at all. And it's like, well, he smoked marijuana, and he had a girlfriend, and he had sex, so therefore he must not care about religion at all, because he's doing all these things. And the reality of the situation is people are incredibly complex and can have deep-seated views on faith and everything else, and yet not always live up to these sort of ultimate tenets of their faith. And I feel like that's what's going on here. Adnan is not the perfect Muslim boy, but that doesn't mean he doesn't take Islam seriously. It doesn't mean he doesn't take his faith seriously. And it doesn't mean that when he falls short, it doesn't cause him some stress. And it doesn't mean that he can both really want to date Hae and be with her, and also feel guilty about being with her at the same time, because it conflicts with something else that he feels deeply about. So, I mean, this is the ultimate case where people are complex and they contain multitudes. And there's so much black and white in this case, and there's so many efforts by people on both sides to force everything into this black and white view, and it just doesn't work, and it doesn't reflect reality. And I think when you look at Hae's diary entries, you see that. You see how much more complex this is and what was going on with him and with her at this time.
And to add that to that complexity, I think it's so important that you bring that up, Brett, that he, can take his faith really seriously and seemingly not meet the tenets of his faith. I think all of us literally live that. None of us are perfect. But I think it's particularly interesting here because he is being raised by parents who have expectations for him that just do not fit with the mainstream high school in Baltimore that he's being raised in, right? Again, this is just from personal experience. It doesn't make it right or wrong, but like I was raised in, say, a square. My life is a square, and my high school, which was in Austin, Texas, and like very mainstream public high school with, football teams. I was on the drill team, was like a triangle. There was no way that the way that my parents thought I should live and the way that they thought was right could ever fit into the life that I lived, even if I lived perfectly as they wanted me to, just because I was living a different life than they did. I grew up in a different country. I go to a different school, speaking a different language. In extracurricular activities that didn't exist in their country, you know, those sorts of things. And I think that's what he's facing here as well. So just because he doesn't live the life that maybe his parents expected him to, or the teachings his religion expected him to with his culture, doesn't mean that he didn't actually fulfill all of it either. It's like he can't. They don't transpose onto each other. He literally is living two lives. I think Hae is too. I think a lot of teenagers do, but I think you really see this with Adnan. He is literally living two lives, not because he's necessarily two-faced, but because there are two sides of his life that cannot match onto each other perfectly. This is kind of the ultimate quandary of being not of mainstream culture. Right? You don't have to be an immigrant to understand that. I think a lot of us are not mainstream culture in some aspect of our lives, and we can understand the complexities that brings to our life. And you add on top of that, Hae sees all of this. She sees this because whether it's because Adnan's talking about it with her or she's seeing it in her own life, she recognizes it's not her fault. But she is part of that second life that doesn't match perfectly to the first life that maybe his religion and his family expect Adnan to live in. And even though that's not her fault, there is still some guilt and there's still some stress, because what we know about Hae is that she's a go-getter. She's in honors. They're both in honors. They are achievers. They're not people who don't care about their lives, right? They're not perfect people, but they certainly are go-getters. They go to class. They're honors students. They're driven. I mean, Adnan is prom prince, right? These are popular people too, who are excelling not only in academics, but excelling in their social lives as well. And they're deep in their emotions. And she recognizes that she's part of kind of this tension that is really not of Adnan's making necessarily either. It's just life. Life is complex. And I do think it's important to point out that she recognizes this because these are complex thoughts and emotions to process at 17. There are entire pieces of literature written by adults who try to process these important and difficult concepts, and we still haven't figured it out. And so for them to begin struggling with these very adult issues as teenagers is weighty. And so with that is in October when she writes that kind of this tension of these for lack of a better word, double lives that they have. But in October 15th specifically, Don starts working at the Lens Crafters where he will meet Hae. And as you know, Don soon becomes Hae's new love. Now, on October 24th, Hae starts working at Lens Crafters, so just a little bit after Don. And Don will later testify that Adnan would visit her at work. On October 30th, the imam at Adnan's mosque gives a sermon which appears to have been directed at him and Hae's relationship. That night is the night of the homecoming dance. Adnan's parents showed up and caused a scene, so much so that the principal had to tell them not to talk to Hae. I mean, this is kind of like the worlds that we just talked about that don't match on perfectly are clashing. They've been able to kind of exist separately until October 30th. I don't know if you've ever had a sermon directed at you in church, Brett, but I have not. I can't imagine. I mean, to be singled out in that way, of course, probably not by name, but everyone around, just a close-knit community, knows it's about you. They all know about your relationship. And to kind of feel like the judgment and the wrath of God are upon you, and then to have your parents step in when I can't imagine something more embarrassing at that age if my parents were to show up at a homecoming dance and cause a scene with my boyfriend. And that's what we have here. Stressors. Whatever you think of them, these are just, I think, stressors at a teenage level, but also at an adult level.
Yeah, I got kicked out of a church once when I was in high school. So that was...
What? Are you serious?
That was an interesting experience. Yeah. And it was very stressful. It was a really... weird
we have
thing.
to know, what did you do?
I didn't do anything. I mean, that's the thing. It's totally strange. But I was in high school. I was going to this church, and it's hard for me to even explain it because you guys wouldn't understand. You just wouldn't understand. But I was like a leader in the youth group. I would do sermons. I would lead the prayer. I mean, it's very like a leadership position. And essentially, at some point, this one guy who was like a big sort of leader in the church decided that I was like really the devil in disguise, basically, and sort of worked it out that he got all these other people to believe that. And so literally one day I'm at home and get a phone call from him, and I'm basically told that I'm not welcome there anymore because I'm a bad influence. And
oh my gosh, Brett, I feel so bad for young Brett.
And the strange thing about it was, at the time, I mean, I like to think I'm still a very good person. I don't know, maybe that's my conceit, but at the time I actually was like, you know, I didn't drink, I didn't do anything. I was like a very good person. And it was like a shattering experience for me in a lot of ways, because it made me question all sorts of things. This is way too much. This is way too personal. I don't know if I'm getting into this, but nevertheless.
No, I actually don't think this is too personal at all, because first of all, I'm so sorry that happened to you. But I think the point is, your religious community is your whole life, even if you don't view it as your whole life. I mean, it very much sets the tone. It's your extended community. It's your parents' community. Whether you put stock in it or not, it is important to you. And that's what's happening to Adnan here. I mean, me listening to your story, I have like incredible empathy for young Brett, and I didn't even know you back then. I don't know exactly what happened, but that just shines a light on how important a religious community is, whether you are a very committed church or mosque goer or not. And so to have like a sermon directed at you, to be targeted in that way, is incredibly perspective shifting, at the very least, if not shattering.
And at the time, my parents were like supporting me. But in my mind, I was like, are they just saying that because they're my parents and they feel like they have to support me? Do they really think that I'm in the wrong, that I was the bad guy in this? And if you're thinking about Adnan, his parents showed up at prom, right? So it's like Adnan gets preached at, essentially, in the mosque, which had to be embarrassing to him. Then he goes to prom, or he goes to this dance, whatever it is, and his parents show up. And this is one of those things that has been retconned in both Serial and all the other podcasts that cover this. They're like, oh, he didn't care. It was such a big joke. He got home and he called his friends and they laughed about it. Of course he called his friends and laughed about it, because the last thing he wants to do is let anyone know how deeply this affected him. I would have laughed about it too. I would have called my friends and been like, ha ha, I just got kicked out of a church. Ha ha, not a big deal. And then in reality, I'm like, oh my God, like what is wrong with me, right?
And he has to do that because it was so public, right? Like if he's not talking about it, somebody else is talking about it. And remember, he's prom prince. So it's not like he's some like wallflower that nobody knows. This is happening to the prom prince. Everybody in school knows about it. So he's going to call his friends and be like, no big deal, man. Am I right? Like, parents be parents. Of course he's going to do that. But it doesn't matter how you feel about your parents. If your parents show up at a school dance uninvited and cause a scene to the point where the principal has to step in to keep your parents from being full-on parents, that's embarrassing. That is embarrassing no matter who you are. And whatever his words say, it was a big deal for him, for them to do this. And it's a big deal because of what you just said, Brett. At least your parents were supporting you. What this shows is that his parents agreed with what the mom was saying. And that kind of highlights, I mean, you're already going to feel targeted if a sermon is directed at you. But then to have like your very own parents step in and basically take action on that. Again, you can be like cool as a cucumber, like nothing, everything rolls off your back. It doesn't matter. These are basically the two entities in your life that matter the most, especially at 17, your parents and your religious leader.
And the fact of the matter is, this had a huge effect on their relationship. Like, this was a momentous event in their relationship.
And so this happens on October 30th. On October 31st, this same friend group was supposed to go to Hallow Scream at Adventure World, but Hae cancels at the last minute. And the very next day, on November 1st, 1998, Hae and Adnan break up. And it's Hae who breaks up with Adnan. And on November 2nd, Hae writes the following note. Quote, to Adnan, okay, here goes. I'm really getting annoyed that the situation is going the way it is. At first, I kind of wanted to make this easy for me and for you. You know, people break up all the time. Your life is not going to end. You'll move on and I'll move on. But apparently you won't respect me enough to respect my decision. I really couldn't give damn about what you want to say. With the way things have been since 7:45 a.m. this morning, now I'm more certain that I'm making the right choice. The more fuss you make, the more I'm determined to do what I gotta do. I really don't think I can be in a relationship like we had. Not between us, but mostly about the stuff around us. I seriously did expect you to accept, although not understand. I'll be busy today, tomorrow, and probably till Thursday. I got other things to do. Better than give you any hope that we'll get back together. I really don't see that happening, especially now. I never wanted to end this like this, so hostile and cold. But I really don't know what to do. Hate me if you will, but you should remember that I could never hate you. First of all, what a mature letter. Truly. She doesn't say explicitly what it is, but I think this line says just volumes. It's not between us, but mostly about the stuff around us. 3 days earlier is when the imam had the sermon directed at Adnan. It's when his parents showed up at the dance, made such a scene that the principal stepped in, and then this all flows from it. It seems pretty clear from this letter that it's the life around them, right? Hae's life, the 2 lives that she has to have, the 2 lives that Adnan has to have. That's like 4 different lives that have to be meshed together. They're not meshing together, and it's created incredible turmoil. That's no longer just bubbling under the surface. Now everything is out in the open. When you have like an altercation essentially at a school dance where the principal steps in, everything's public. Everyone's probably talking. This is a lot of heat on both of them. And I say this is a mature letter because she's being very clear about this breakup. I don't know about you guys, but in high school, there were a lot of like ghosting, kind of like what Brett did to, one of our Zoom sessions where he just ghosts, where you don't clearly say what's going to happen. She says it clearly. We are breaking up and I'm not giving you any hope. We're not getting back together. This is it. And she also recognizes that he may hate her for it and she's okay with it. But it's like she's being the mature one and just recognizing like the situation they're in is kind of untenable at this phase in their life, and she's not going to be part of it anymore. And even if she's misunderstood in it, she's willing to take on that burden.
Yeah, and this is the second time they've broken up, and it's the second time that Hae has broken up with Adnan. This one feels more permanent, though it's not going to end up being more permanent, as we're going to see. This same day, Adnan gets into a conversation with Hope Schwab. Hope Schwab is a teacher at the school who's going to become important. She's a teacher, but she's younger, and she's very close to Adnan and Hae. I don't know if you guys were like this in high school. I had a history teacher who was like 24, and her teaching assistant was like 22. The 22-year-old would go to parties that, like, at high school parties, which is probably inappropriate. But in any event...
Yeah, totally inappropriate.
Yeah, it was totally inappropriate. We were all really good friends with them. We were friends with them in a way we weren't with the people who were like 50, right? They were much closer to us. They had been in high school a few years before. And so they were the kind of people that you went to and you talked to about things that were going on. And Hope Schwab is that kind of person. So Adnan, he goes to her and he's got a class called Research and Experience with her. And he goes to her to talk to her. Hae is actually an intern for Schwab. I think Schwab also teaches French, maybe, and Hae is an intern for her. And Schwab will actually describe Hae as more of a friend than a student later on. But on this day, Adnan, he's in Schwab's room, and he's asking advice about dating someone of a different faith. Schwab was Catholic, but she had dated a number of Jewish men, and this led both Hae and Adnan to seek her counsel. Sort of a weird moment in the trial, she brings this up, that she dated a bunch of Jewish guys, and they get subjected to, because it's sort of a weird thing to bring up. But nevertheless, it is relevant, because that's why they're talking to her, because she sort of has experience in this in a way that other people maybe not. So Adnan asks her whether love is strong enough to overcome religion, and what would happen if he married someone of a different faith. This conversation lasts for about 30 minutes, at which point her phone rings. It's Hae. Hae tells her to pretend that she is a teacher because she doesn't want Adnan to know that she's talking to Hope, because they'd had a fight obviously. Hope agrees, and she doesn't say anything to Adnan, though he actually stays asking her questions for the rest of the period. So obviously, this is something that Adnan is struggling with, this religious difference, and what do? Do you go with the love that you have, or do you sort of fall back on the faith that your family has? And look, I mean, it's almost cliche. If this didn't end in murder, if one of them didn't end up dead, this would be cliche. The fact that a high school kid is struggling with religion versus the fact he's in love with some girl. It's so typical. And yet that's what Adnan is going through at this time.
Angie has made it easier than ever to connect with skilled professionals to get all your home projects done well. If you own a home, you know how much work it can take. Whether it's everyday maintenance and repairs or making dream projects a reality, it can be hard just to know where to start. But now, all you need to do is Angie that and find a skilled local pro who will deliver the quality and expertise you need.
And Alice, you can turn to Angie with confidence, no matter what the size of your home or the size of your project. Whether you've got a 100-year-old house like I do, where it seems like things are always breaking, or if you're renting and you're needing someone to help you with moving, installations, or cleaning, Angie is there for you, and they're there for you with confidence. So, Angie has over 20 years of home service experience, and they've combined it with new tools to simplify the whole process. Bring them your project online or with Angie's app, answer a few questions, and Angie can handle the rest from start to finish. Or they can help you compare quotes from multiple pros and connect instantly, which means you can take care of just about any home project in just a few taps. Because when it comes to getting the most out of your home, you can do this when you Angie that. Download the free Angie mobile app today or visit Angie.com. That's ANGI.com. Check them out today. Angie.com. ANGI.com.
And later that day, Adnan is in health class with Aisha Pittman. They are studying pregnancy at the time. Adnan has the breakup note from Hae, and he is writing notes back and forth on it to Aisha. The first note reads, quote, "I'm going to kill." This obviously comes back to bite Adnan when he's later accused of actually killing Hae. Aisha later testifies that this line was not on the note during his initial conversation, and she never saw it, indicating that Adnan added it later. It's also possible she either didn't remember it or didn't want to remember it. It certainly fits with the rest of the conversation. The conversation between Aisha and Adnan continues. Aisha writes, "Here's the thing. Hae's pregnant and having mood swings." Okay, so is this a joke or for real? Aisha will later testify that she did not believe that Hae was pregnant. This is what the note says, and they're in health class studying pregnancy. Adnan writes, "You should ask her to make a list of all her symptoms and compare it with the list on the overhead." Aisha, "Yeah, let me ask her, quote, 'Are your breasts tender?'" Adnan writes, "You'll probably want to examine, but crosses that line out." Aisha then writes, "Maybe she was pregnant and she had an abortion on Saturday while we went to Adventure World." Adnan, "Her clumsy self probably tripped and fell on the way to the clinic and caused an abortion." Aisha, "She would never think she's pregnant, and every time I do something with a guy, I think I am." Adnan, "Whenever you kiss a guy, you probably think you are pregnant. She's scheduled for a sonogram and she's still in denial." Aisha, "Not that bad for me. For her, hell yeah."
And let me just say, there's a lot there, and this is going to be me and my ultimate sort of like trying to put myself in other people's shoes. Aisha is clearly trying to help Adnan, who is in a very bad place and is very mad at Hae. Aisha is one of Hae's good friends. This is not great. I can't imagine, as Aisha eventually had to do, get on a stand in front of a jury in the world and testify about this note, because this is these are crappy things to write about your friend, right? But Adnan's just broke up with Hae. She's trying to be a friend. She's trying to be there for him. It's not great. Obviously, the worst part of it is this sort of "I will kill" thing. And that's going to come back, and that's going to be talked about a lot. According to Aisha, that wasn't on the note. He wrote that later. It is Adnan's handwriting, but I mean, who knows? There have been questions about whether or not there had been a pregnancy scare at some point with Hae. Hae writes a poem which you can find in the case file if you read it, that is about having an abortion. I don't know. I mean, who knows, right? Her and Adnan, I mean, they were having a lot of sex that was unprotected. They could have had pregnancy scares. It seems like they did. I don't know. This is one of those things that is a complication of this case it's hard to say. But clearly this is on their mind at this time.
Because they're also in class literally talking about it. And also at this age, I think you talk about it a lot, especially if you're having sex. Whatever it is, that is the note. And Aisha does testify about it.
Right. And look, like I said, I don't know what to make of this. To me, this is kind of throwaway stuff. Some people think this is significant. Maybe it is. I don't know. There are mysteries about this case. This is not the only one. There are mysteries about this case. Alice mentioned Bilal earlier. He's the guy who's a mystery. The extent to his involvement in this case is a mystery. Whether or not there are pregnancy scares is a mystery. It's hard to say, but I don't know. You read this note, you can take from it what you want. In any event, they have broken up. They are having problems. They are done. Let's fast forward to November 3rd, 1998. This is from Hae's diary. November 3rd, 1998. Very late night. Who would have thought we would end like this? Who would have imagined the amount of pain that comes with a broken heart? I know I'm doing the right thing. Call me selfish, but this pain is way less than what it would be if we stayed together. More hostility at his house. And she writes love, but she crosses it out. I loved you. Oh, screw it. I still love you. I would give everything to be in your arms, but my heart's not that strong. Forgive me, love. All the pain, I promise you, would end soon, and you'll move on.
Very dramatic. Dramatic in the sense of, like, breakups are dramatic. You know, she was in love. She is in love. Even the way she writes this, you can tell she hasn't just moved on in the sense of, okay, close that chapter of my life and move on. This is all very complex. This is all very fresh and raw still for them, even a month after the initial breakup.
And you listen to Cyril and you listen to Adnan, he talks about this, and he presents it as he was surprised by how she felt. That he didn't realize that she thought this was that significant. His religion and his family and those interactions, that it was much more important to her than it was to him. And I just don't believe that. I think Hae was very sophisticated. I think she understood what was going on with Adnan. I think what she writes reflects reality. And I think it reflects the reality of the complications of their life and the complications of their relationship. And I think you see that in such pure terms, because when she's writing this, there's no reason for her to lie. Adnan, guilty or innocent, he wants to get out of prison, and he has a reason to look back on things, even if he's doing so honestly, and cast them in a certain light. She did not have that. She is approaching things as she saw them. And I think you see that in her diary, and it's a reason that I think it is so important to read her diary, as difficult as it is, and as unsettling as it is to read this diary of this young woman who would be murdered. But here's the thing. At this point, it's all about how they're broken up, and this is for the best. But very shortly thereafter, they get back together. And at this point, Hae writes long, sappy diary entries about just how much she loves Adnan and how they will be together forever. And I will say this, even at the worst of things, she clearly loved Adnan. Even that diary entry we just read, she loved Adnan. Here's what she writes. I can't settle, but this is different. This feels so real, so loving, and ever so amazing. It's so amazing. I feel like I can't love him any more than I already do. But every time I see his smile, my heart melts like the day of the prom, when I knew I was falling in love with him. When I close my eyes, I swear I see his smiling face and see him mouth those 3 words that sends my heart spinning. This is a true and genuine love filled with caring, warmth, and occasional desires. But nothing can turn my heart away from him, because he has my heart. I can't be any happier, but yet I keep on being happier. I can't help smiling, and yet I can't stop myself. So she's back with Adnan, and the love as intense as it ever was.
And again, I can't emphasize this enough. These are very mature thoughts that she's putting, and these are her like frank thoughts, right? That's why we seem to have this ping pong back and forth. Who of us don't have radically different emotions from one day to the next? And that's why, she's not kind of shading things in retrospect. She's not saying, this is how I felt 2 months ago. She's writing it as she feels it. And so that's why it reads very real to me, because we go through these emotions. I love this person. I hate this person. The complexities of life are being lived through her pen in real time. On December 6th, 1998, Hae writes, "What's the matter with me? Every time I close my eyes, I see my baby, but I keep on thinking about someone else. Don Clenidens. Why? I don't know. Why? I do like him as a coworker, also maybe as a friend, but I want to get closer to him. I don't know what's the matter with me. A part of me keeps me from Don because of Adnan. A part of me keeps on thinking about Don. I'm going to have to get my thoughts straight. I do love Adnan, but today I kept on imagining Don over my body instead of Adnan. Don, 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 Don. Why do I keep on thinking about your baby blues and your smiles? Don is what I would go for in my past. Blonde, blue eyes, white, built, sexy, and nice Camaro. But me, I'm taken. I love Adnan. Oh dear." I mean, you can see kind of the angst in this. So this is what? A month later, maybe less than a month later, she has started working at LensCrafters. She's met Don. They've known each other at this point for about a month, a little bit over a month. And this is kind of embarrassing stuff, right? Like, she is writing this as her diary. I do not think she's writing this for anybody else when she's thinking about Don all over her body. And she is very much struggling with how it could be that she's taken, in the sense that she is in a relationship, she's loyal, but she can't stop thinking about this new guy. And he's the kind of guy that kind of probably would cause a lot fewer problems, right? This is a guy who exists in mainstream culture, right? He's a white guy. She says that. He has blue eyes, blonde hair. And there would be just a lot fewer problems if she were with Don. And
we talk about how Hae is mature, and she is. But in some ways, she's still a teenager. And this is one of the ways. I mean, this is very typical, right? Don is like out of a movie. He's got his Camaro. He's 20. She's 18. He's a little bit older. He's got the blue eyes and blonde hair. He's the perfect guy, right? And you can see that. And I love this about Hae, because I just feel like Hae is she's just a teenage girl. She's an 18-year-old girl. And she's just so typical in so many ways. And I don't know what to say about it other than that.
I mean, you see it in the way she ends off, right? Oh dear. Like, there is an innocence to this. And it doesn't make her a bad person. I think all of us have probably been in those situations, whether it's a boy or something else, of wanting two different things that are juxtaposed to each other. And she is very honestly writing about this. The fact that she feels bad about this says something about her. She's not someone who dates two people at the same time. She feels loyalty to Adnan. She recognizes that it's wrong that she feels this way if she is in a, committed relationship. And she continues to process this. December 8th, Hae is writing in her diary that she wants to tell Adnan about Don, but can't do it. This continues as a theme here. On December 15th, 1998, you have to go look at this because it's really a picture that she draws, but basically she writes Don, 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 Adnan, 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 and she writes the two of their names with smaller versions of their name. So Adnan's written in smaller versions of Adnan, Don is written in smaller versions of Don. This is like the doodling of the pros and cons of who to love. I mean, she is conflicted. You can tell she's probably like, as she's writing their names over and over, like, what am I going to do? Like, what is the right answer as she's doodling this?
Yeah, and I wish you guys could see this because it is the ultimate high school diary entry. literally Adnan's name written out with Adnan. So she writes Adnan, probably 40 different times to make out Adnan. And then Dawn, with Dawn written over and over again to make the D. Dawn written over and over again to make the O. And then the N. That's where she is. She's in that place where she very clearly is going to go with Dawn. That's the way it's going to go. But she's still struggling with that internally about whether or not she's going to stick with Adnan or she's going to go with Dawn, who very clearly has sort of won her heart at this point. So obviously she's in the midst of this. She's trying to decide what to do. December 21st, 1998, Hae gives Adnan another breakup note. And this time, it's for good. She tells Adnan that she likes someone else. Juwan Gordon, who's one of Adnan's friends, will eventually tell police that Adnan was shocked and confused. He did not see this coming, and he could not understand how Hae could tell him that she loved him, but she had feelings for someone else. Juwan told police that shock turned to anger. Adnan was mad, and Juwan had never seen Adnan like this before, and he'd never seen him care about anyone like that before. Hae will also tell her friends that Adnan did not take the breakup well, though from Adnan's perspective, he will tell his friends it was a mutual thing and he's fine, which is what he would say. On the same day that Hae breaks up with Adnan, Aisha Pittman will receive a phone call from a cell phone number associated with Bilal Ahmad. And this is one of those weird things that happens that's hard to place. We're going to talk about this later with cell phones. Adnan eventually gets a cell phone. Bilal is the one who purchased it, and it goes on Bilal's cell phone bill. So the fact that this call goes through the way it does makes you wonder if maybe Adnan had access to one of Bilal's cell phones before he got his own cell phone. Obviously, Bilal has no reason to call Aisha. How important is this? I don't know. It's just something we wanted to highlight for you.
So December 23rd, 1998, Hae is in a one-car accident near Owings Mills Mall. Hae calls Adnan, and he picks her up at LensCrafters and drives her home. The next day, Dawn and Adnan will look at Hae's car together and agree that she shouldn't drive it. Around December 25th, 1998, despite being broken up, Hae gives Adnan an expensive leather jacket for Christmas, and he also gives her a framed picture of them together. Really doesn't sound like broken up types of presents. But there you have it. Those are the presents that they exchange. So clearly they're still in each other's lives. She has, and I think we've been in this situation before where you may have broken up with someone, but something traumatic happens, like a car accident, you're going to call the person you trust the most. That was most in recent history. And so it doesn't really surprise me that she called Adnan, but it also shows you where her heart is and kind of where their relationship is. They're broken up, but they're still very much in each other's lives, and they're still a part of each other's hearts. On December 31st, 1998, Hae picks up Adnan and takes him to where his car is being serviced. Later that night, Adnan meets a new girl, Nisha, at a New Year's Eve party, and Hae agrees to go on a date with Dawn. For Hae, this was the beginning of an in-person relationship. Adnan and Nisha mostly talked on the phone, only seeing each other at the New Year's Eve party and one other party later.
So after January, both Adnan and Hae have new relationships. On January 3rd, Adnan calls Nisha, which is the girl that he met at this January 1st New Year's Eve party, on the phone at 9:45, and they don't get off the phone until 3 a.m. the next morning. So although they're not seeing each other in person, they're talking on the phone a lot, and they're sort of establishing the baseline for many a high school relationship that starts with a lot of long, complex talks on the phone. On January 5th, this is speculation, but a lot of people speculate that January 5th is the day that Adnan learns that Hae is now dating Dawn. The reason for this is this is the day that Adnan is back at school and Hae's back at school, and Adnan probably would have heard from somebody that Hae is now dating Dawn. Some people speculate about this. In fact, Adnan kind of says at some point that he never knew Hae was dating Dawn. This is very clearly not true, but When he learned of it is hard to say. January 5th is also the day that several things happen. And this is a little confusing, so bear with me. Several things happen that are later remembered to have happened on the day Hae went missing, which is January 13th. So let's talk about all the stuff that has been reported to have happened on the 13th when Hae went missing that probably actually happened on the 5th. This is a great example of how people's memories are flawed. So the first is an interview with a television news station with Hae and other athletes. This has been reported to have happened on January 13th, but I think most people who've looked at this think it probably actually happened earlier on January 5th. So at 9 a.m. on January 5th, Channel 36 arrives at Woodlawn to interview several students for the Athlete of the Week, and Hae was present and interviewed. The interviews were completed by 1 o'clock. We know that Hae was interviewed in the 10 o'clock hour, but pretty much everyone agrees that Hae was in all her classes the morning of the 13th, which means if she was present in her morning classes, she wasn't being interviewed by some news channel at the same time. And that makes us think this probably happened more like the 5th. We're going to talk about more why we think that in a second. Later, 2 administrators will remember that this interview took place on the 13th, but it seems almost impossible for that to be true for reasons we will discuss in a minute. The second thing that happens is that Debbie Warren, who is a friend of Hae's, will recall talking to Hae the afternoon of the 13th, possibly as late as 3 p.m., near the gym, and that Hae will tell her that she has to go see her boyfriend, Don. This testimony would be helpful for the defense since the prosecution believed Hae was dead by then. This is something we're going to talk about a lot. This timing of the prosecution is difficult to reconcile with everything else we hear. Now, though, with a focus on Asia McClain, which is someone else we're going to talk about as an alibi witness for Adnan, it actually kind of hurts Adnan as it puts Hae still at school after Asia is already gone. We're going to talk a lot about the Asia McClain alibi. She essentially gives an alibi for Adnan during the period which the prosecution postulates Adnan was killing Hae. But when you combine that with what Debbie is saying, you actually could imagine Asia sees Adnan at the library and then this murder happens later on. In any event, nevertheless, you have Debbie saying that she saw Hae that day, but she also sees Adnan at the same time at the counselor's office at around the same time. The reality is Debbie is probably confused about what happened that day versus any other day. Debbie's recollection is an example of the problem that Sarah Conning talks about a lot when she says it's hard to remember what you're doing on a particular day 6 weeks after it happens. Unfortunately, the police didn't take Hae's disappearance all that seriously at first. This is a big problem. It's a problem with all these cases. You always have the issue of the police. They just don't take it seriously. They don't do the job they should, and so you lose time. And we've said this 1,000 times. The most complex, confusing, controversial cases always begin with a police investigation that leaves you wanting. And I think we have that here. They did not nail down this stuff early enough, and so you have people who are trying to remember what happened. They're racking their brains. They're doing the best they can. They want to help their friend, but they're coming up with stuff that probably didn't actually happen when they think it did. And so you probably have Debbie who's just wrong about the day.
And it makes sense that these people would think this happened on January 13th because they know January 13th is the day that Hae goes missing and is probably dead. And they're trying to remember the last interaction they had with Hae. So it makes sense that they would think it happened on the last day that she is known to be alive. But in reality, they probably didn't see her on that day, which is why they're conflating the dates. And we see this all the time with witnesses.
And it's not just them. Inez Butler, who is a teacher, and in fact, I think often described as sort of the athletic director. I mean, she's another person who gives a description of what Hae was doing that day that probably was not accurate. Now, Hae had a habit of swinging by the gym after school to pick up hot fries and apple juice from Butler, who would sell it at the gym. And Butler would say that this actually happened the day Hae went missing, and that Hae told her she had something to do but to tell the bus not to leave without her. Now that bus would be the bus to the wrestling match that day, which Hae needed to be at as the co-manager of the team, and the only manager who knew how to keep score. In fact, the other co-manager would later say that she was upset when Hae didn't show up to the match that night, as she needed her there to keep score. So all that makes sense, right? Hae says, "Hey, hold the bus for me." She gets murdered. She doesn't show up. And the other co-manager, not knowing that that's what happened, is upset that Hae did not appear. But in fact, that's not what happened. Hae wasn't going to any wrestling match the night of the 13th because there wasn't one. And in fact, she was scheduled to work that night to start at 6 p.m. There was a bus going to a basketball game, and it's likely that Butler and the co-manager both confused the dates and thought this was the day that Hae was going to that match, but in fact, there was a basketball game which Hae would not have been going to anyway. And there's a letter that Hae wrote to Dawn that seems to confirm that much of what people remember as happening on the 13th actually happened a week earlier. This letter was found in Hae's car. Apparently, she never delivered it to Dawn. It says, "Hey, cutie, sorry I couldn't stay. I have to go to a wrestling match at Randallstown High, but I promise to page you as soon as I get home. Till then, take care and drive safely. Always, Hae. P.S. The interview went well. I promise to tape it so you can see me as often as you want." So, this letter ties everything together. The interview Hae is referencing is likely the one filmed that morning at the school by Channel 36. But we also know she was going to the Randallstown wrestling match that day. The wrestling team had played Randallstown on January 5th. And Hae had, in fact, not shown up as she was supposed to, having decided to hang out with Dawn instead, who she'd gone to see after work, just like Debbie testified to about her interaction with Hae on the 13th. So essentially what happened here, she writes this letter expecting that she's going to go to the Randallstown match as she promised to. Then she decides, you know what, I'd rather hang out with Dawn. So she doesn't go to Randallstown, which means her co-manager has to go to Randallstown and do the scoring and is upset with Hae because she wasn't there. And later on, she remembers that as happening on the 13th. But in fact, that's not when all this happened. All of this happened on the 5th. In fact, most of the things you hear about Hae that happened on that day actually happened on the 5th. In the grand scheme of things, that doesn't mean all that much, except there's basically no one who saw Hae after 2:15, the day she disappeared, that we can believe, because their memories are all flawed.
On January 6th, 1999, Dawn and Hae go to the movies. On January 7th, Adnan tells Stephanie, Jay's girlfriend, that he's surprised and upset that Hae has a new boyfriend. But he also says Dawn is a step down and that at least now he doesn't have to feel guilty about talking to other girls. Adnan will later tell Detective O'Shea that he didn't know Hae was dating Dawn. On January 9th, Hae updates her AIM profile. AIM. Her interests: movies, phone, partying, TV, music, and most importantly, Dawn. Likes: looking in his blue-gray eyes, fast cars like his Camaro, driving to Bel Air, selling glasses, and her beauty, spending as much time as possible in the lab. Occupation: part-time sales, full-time girlfriend. Quote, "I love you and I miss you, Donnie." In other words, this is super public. Your AIM profile is like the thing out there.
And those of you who weren't around back then, you cannot appreciate how in the late 90s, how important your AIM profile was. Your AIM profile was everything. The fact that she's including all this in her AIM profile, I mean, there was no hiding this. The whole point is to be out there. I mean, this was everything. Adnan would have seen this. I'm sorry. He absolutely would have seen this. Everyone would have seen this. Figuring out your AIM away message was the most important thing you did in the late 90s if you were in high school. So to the extent that Adnan tries to claim he didn't really know that she was dating Dawn, no. He would have known then. everyone would have known then. This was like Facebook relationship status.
This was meant to be a billboard.
Yeah, it was a billboard.
Yeah, and it's meant to tell the world, because remember, her relationship with Adnan had to be secret for many reasons. And so in some ways, this might be seen as a middle finger to Adnan, but in another way, it's also like she's been having to live a secret relationship life for a very long time, and she's not having to do that anymore.
Right, exactly.
And on January 11th, Bilal Ahmed buys a phone for Adnan from AT&T. And again, the bill is under Bilal's name.
Which, as we've said, this whole relationship with Bilal Ahmed, it is a mystery that's hard to figure out. No matter how you come down in this case, it's a strange thing. So that's January 11th. January 12th, Jay Wilds has his birthday. Adnan's phone is activated. In one of his many statements, Jay will later say that night, Adnan solicited his help in killing Hae. And in fact, the phone records indicate that night, Adnan called Jay at his home. At 10:30, Hae is at Dawn's house, and she suggests that she should call in sick to school and stay with him the next day. But Dawn has to work, and so she reluctantly leaves. Hae leaves Dawn's house and gets home around 11:30. She calls him when she gets home, and they talk until 3 in the morning. They make plans to see each other after Hae gets off work at 10 p.m. the next day. Dawn will never see her again. 24 hours later, she is dead. And her last entry in her diary, January 12th, 1999. I love you, Dawn. I think I have found my soulmate. I love you so much. I fell in love with you the moment I opened my eyes to see you in the break room for the first time. That's the last thing she writes in her diary the night before. At 11:27 p.m., Adnan will call Hae. It lasts 2 seconds. And as we will talk about in the next episode, he will call her a couple more times in an effort to give her his cell phone number. But that brings us to January 13th, 1999, which will be the day that Hae's life ends, no matter who is responsible for her death. Well, we brought you up to this point. We're going to spend at least an entire episode, maybe more, on January 13th. It is the day of days. We can go through that next time. I'm sure you already have many comments and questions. Shoot us an email at prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. Thank you so much to those of you on Patreon, especially those of you who joined us for live recordings of this episode where you got to see not only me, but Alice, and most importantly, young Brittany, live and in the flesh. We love you guys so much. Thank you so much for supporting us. We cannot begin to express to you how crazy it is that people actually spend money on us. It's wild. It's one thing to listen to us and buy some HelloFresh or whatever, but it's another thing entirely to actually open up your checkbooks for us. So that means a lot to us, and we really appreciate it. I hope those of you who are listening are leaving reviews. Remember, if you leave a 5-star review and you leave a question, we'll answer those questions at the end of an episode. Give us some new questions. We need some. This is going to be a long road. We're going to talk a lot about this case. We've got a lot to say, and I'm sure you have a lot to say as well, and we want to hear from you. So do not be shy. Well, Alice, I hate to even ask, given your current situation, but do you have anything to add before we sign off?
For anyone who says that we owe them something or that for some reason we're not delivering, look at what's happening right now. We love you guys. I'm not sure my family loves you guys right now, but thank you for all of your support. Thank you for what will be, I'm sure, incredible dialogue that comes from this case. And, I hope that we all learn from each other, and I enjoyed diving into this with you, Brett, with a 3-hour live.
Yeah, this has been amazing. Really enjoyed this. Great way to kick off this case. Can't wait to dive more into this with you, Alice, and we will do so again next week. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
On January 7th, Adnan tells Stephanie, Jay's girlfriend, that he's surprised and upset.
So cute.
This might not work. Sorry.
Just do it. It doesn't matter. People love it.
January 7th, Adnan tells Stephanie, Jay's girlfriend, that he's surprised. I know. She's like, this is sleep time, Mom. What are you doing? This is not going to work. Sorry. This is not going to work.
So what do people think? There are 119 of you here. Do people come in thinking Adnan's guilty, not guilty, sort of in the middle? What's the deal? I don't know. I have to get to the end. And that's why we're doing this, right? So I can figure it out for myself. I don't have any bongos.
It's a streaming hot summer on Pluto TV featuring hit blockbusters during popcorn summer movies. Watch Mark Wahlberg try and solve a murder in Four Brothers, or go on an adventure with an Indiana Jones movie marathon. Plus, Pluto TV has hundreds of channels with thousands more movies, available live and on demand. Download Pluto TV.